How's it going, everybody? And welcome to episode 345 of Master My Garden podcast. Now, this week's episode, we're looking at how we can revive the August garden, and I'll kind of get into why we would need to do that now shortly. Um, so, this week, weather conditions have continued along the same vein as we have had for quite a long time, and it's dry. It's extremely warm. For any of you who happen to be looking at this rather than listening, you'll see the big red face on me as I as I record this upstairs in the attic of my garage where I record all the podcasts. And the heat is really, really warm and stifling. And but in our gardens, and even across the countryside, obviously you hear the stories of farmers feeding a lot of their, what should be their winter feed now, um, just to keep particularly dairy herds and things like that going. And there's and potato farmers, we're hearing stories of them about potatoes just not filling out, not enough moisture levels. Some of them have irrigation, but many wouldn't. And you're hearing of grain farmers on the one hand, certain parts of the country getting extremely good yields, and other parts of the country getting really poor yields, and it is definitely affecting certain areas more than others across the country as well. You have playing pitches, GA pitches, soccer pitches, rugby pitches that are just pure yellow at this stage, and there's sort of desperate attempts to get water onto them at this stage in order to keep them alive. And it's definitely, it's not unprecedented in terms of, the temperatures and the dryness. Possibly what is, a little bit, maybe not unprecedented, but certainly not regular, is the length of it now. So it has been kind of ongoing over a few months with very, very little rain or precipitation in between. And that's what's making this quite unusual, and quite, I suppose, putting quite demands on lots of different things and people. When you flip that back into the garden, I spoke last week about some of the challenges here around fruit trees, and afterwards, actually, loads of people messaged in relation to blackbirds and crows whipping fruit away. And it's always when something like this happens, for want of a better word, you step into the shoe of the blackbird or into the shoe of the crow, and you wonder why is this is, and just everything is so dry, so barren, food, moisture, it's just not there for them either. So things like apples provide obviously some food, but also water in effect, and that's why they're whipping them off the trees the way they are. So, there's challenges. Then, in the anything that has been planted this year, newly planted this year, is struggling, needs a lot of water, and then pair that with hose pipe bans, very low reservoirs if you're on schemes. Even here, I save the water off the polytunnel. I have the capacity to save 4,000 litres. I've got close maybe a couple of times to using it all before it got a chance to top up from rain. But I've never actually completely wiped out. This year I did. And just on the night that I did, or the day that I did, we got about 3 hours of really, really heavy rain, which kind of filled the tanks and buffered it a little bit. But it didn't solve the issue in that I'm pretty much gone now, and there is kind of signs of occasional showers, but certainly nothing that's going to fill those tanks again for the polytunnel. And as a result, it's making growing difficult in the sort of flower garden, or the ornamental garden. There's challenges as well. Like, for example, dahlias are flowering at the moment, but there's a kind of a dry look about both the flower and the leaf. There's no vibrancy in the plant. The plant is doing its best. It's pushing out its leaf growth. It's pushing out its flower. It looks reasonably well, but there's no freshness about it, no lushness about it. And that same thing is true for many flowers as well. So this is going to be a good time If you look back over the 12 months, what we have in our heads currently is what we're experiencing, generally speaking. But if you go back over it, and it's interesting when you kind of scoot back over all the episodes of the podcasts, we are, without a doubt, we're experiencing longer periods of certain things. At the moment, it is longer period of drought, longer period of intense heat. But in the spring, it was the opposite. It was a longer period of not cold as in frost and snow and that type of thing, but a longer period of wet and cold through the spring. And that's a flip of last year. So last year we got that really good spring. But when these periods of sort of things that are difficult in the garden, like a really wet and cold long spring, they seem to be longer. So what we experienced in the spring of this year wasn't anything particularly different to what we experience in other, springs. You can get a wet and cold March or a wet and cold April. But what seems to be happening is that there is more longevity in these varying periods. This period of drought that we've had similar in terms of heat and in terms of, lack of rain. But again, it just seems to be extended over a slightly longer period of time than what we have become accustomed to. And as a result of those changes, those fluctuations, we're looking at kind of more difficult times and conditions for gardening, I would say, over the last few years. Um, is it normal weather cycles? I don't know, but certainly there's things we can learn, from these periods to help us going forward. And that is kind of a very long-winded version or way of telling you that's kind of the topic or most of the topic of this week's episode. So in terms of the garden as it is today, I have had, as I mentioned, some challenges in the edible garden. A lot of the apples are gone, whipped off the trees while I was away. Very little you can do about it. I've seen some great tips from various people who listened to the podcast last week and have sent their kind of tips in. And there is things that you can do. Um, but I've never seen blackbirds and crows taking fruit the way they have this year. It was just they were needing that moisture that was within the fruit, and hence they took them and used that. Um, so it's trickier than we're used to, but there's learnings in that, and I suppose the things we can learn is firstly, for me here, number one is to, very easily increase the capacity of what I harvest off my tunnel. Um, some years I may not use it, but at least then if something like this occurs again, which likely it will, that, you have the capacity to have harvested more. Definitely in our gardens, we should be harvesting more. We should all now be looking at it. We have hosepipe bans. It doesn't take a lot for a hosepipe ban to come into place, especially when we're on public schemes. Water is relatively scarce. There's huge amount of water being used in other areas that you won't hear much people talking about, but things like data centers are using huge amounts of water. Um, so we all in our own homes should be coming up with little techniques to allow us to continue to garden. The essentials, obviously. Um, so water butts, storage, things like that are going to be vital. The other thing we should be doing is now, especially at the moment where things are struggling, have a look at what is really doing well. Look at those plants that are not, batting an eyelid at what's happening weather-wise and are just continuing on. You know, um, I had I sowed last year in the perennial grow along. I sowed some Gora seeds, and they look class at the moment. They look like they're made for this type of weather, and they were tricky seed to sow, tricky seed to grow. I had limited success. I only got three plants in the wind up. Um, but in terms of those tree plants, they've hit the ground and they got a watering in at planting stage, and they haven't batted an eyelid at all this dry weather, and they're flowering wonderfully. So, there's a really good, solid performer. I mentioned already a couple of weeks ago the hardy geraniums, again, not batting an eyelid at what's happening in terms of dry weather. Whereas the dahlias, as I said, they are flowering, they do have lush growth, but it's a kind of a harder looking, there's a kind of grey look about them as opposed to a lush look about the plants. The flowers themselves are not as full, not as many petals on it. They're kind of they're like a forced flower. So you know that the plant is struggling slightly. Now they're still performing, they're still flowering, but it's just an example of like hardy geraniums definitely look to be made for anything that comes their way. Same with the Goras, the Verbena boreaensis or bonariensis, just doing the same, just not batting an eyelid. So, certain things just seem to be loving anything that this year has thrown at it. And so that's where we can kind of take our guidance for what we might plant, in future beds or whatever the case may be. Um, Obviously, the other thing that you'll see around the place is, and we mentioned, we've covered it on episodes before, your shrubby type plants, as opposed to your perennials or your perennial borders and things like that. But your shrubby type plants that, okay, they need to get established first. But once they get established, they tend to be a little bit more deep rooted and they're a little bit more resilient. So again, they'll cope with kind of any kind of longer periods, and they'll grow away once you get them established. Now, obviously, in that first year, 2 years, the roots they're not there, so we need to get them established. And when you get them established, then they're much more resilient. Other kind of tips in terms of reviving the August garden, um, mulching the ground again, so that we don't want any bare ground. Out the back where the polytunnel is, the sort of field that it's in has kind of be just left to grow, and it's grass, it's weeds, it's whatnot. It's untidy looking, but there's plant cover on it, and any of the nights that we're getting a dew on the grass, that dew is being retained in that growing zone, so that is continuing to actually grow. So longer plant cover, you're not getting that evaporation. If you've open spaces in your beds, as soon as the sun hits that, which it's hitting early in the morning and it's staying all day, you're getting huge evaporation off your beds, and it's just making that top zone where the roots are very, very dry. So mulching will help you there. So, mulching with bark mulch, farmyard manure, good quality compost, leaves, chopping up old branches, anything that covers that soil. Eventually, when the rain does come and the water does come, it'll start to break down and add organic matter to the soil. Grass clippings, while you won't have many of them because literally lawns are not growing. Um, there's, I went on holidays on the 23rd of July, came back, the lawn barely needed a cut. I gave it a cut, but haven't looked at it since, and it looks like the day I left a month ago. So it's just not growing. But if you do have grass clippings, just sprinkle them around the base of your plants. They will, if the weather stays the way it is, dry and so on, they will crisp up, but they will still create a cover that if there is a dew at night, for example, or if you do water certain plants that have just been being potted in or planted in, you won't get that evaporation because the ground is covered. So, that's kind of things we can do. It's tricky at the moment because, yeah, hosepipe bans, lack of water in water butts that we may have in the garden. Speaking of water butts, again, as always happens, water butts sales when we're in the middle of a drought go through the roof, because everyone gets water butts to, uh, I suppose, fill them, from the taps in some cases. But like the time to put them in is the autumn time, the winter time, when we know we're guaranteed to have rain. Fill the bloody things and have them then for when this happens, as opposed to, getting it in the middle of it when there is no rain falling. But I know you do have it then going forward. So yeah, definitely, definitely. And for me here, um, I'm going to have to get some form of way of getting continuous water into the polytunnel because it's even in these type of temperatures, it's even difficult to be watering. You have to really do it very, very early in the mornings because at any other time it's just too hot in there. So, you want to be, for me, I want to going into next year, I want to create some form of a, maybe not automated, but certainly some level of automation that it's a lot easier to keep that tunnel the way it should be. But to revive the garden now, okay, looking ahead for the next kind of 10 days, there isn't actually much sign of rain on the horizon. Potentially, we might get heavy showers in isolated locations, so that's an opportunity to fill your water butts and so on. But we're not going to get, it looks like for the next week to 10 days, there isn't, a prolonged period of a couple of days where there's a bit of rain falling, where the ground firstly gets to cool down a little bit, where the ground after a couple of days gets to actually absorb the moisture that is falling in the rain, and that the plants actually start to be able to take it in and then begin freshening up. Now that doesn't happen overnight, so that needs, a period of a few days, maybe a week, of some little bit of moisture happening all the time. Now, if we do get these isolated showers and you have done your mulching and all of that rain that falls isn't either flowing away, in a gush, or it is being held there by a mulch, that's a good thing. So that's why I'm saying mulching, even though it might seem at this stage of the year that it's not worth it, it definitely will be. The first time that the rain falls, you will hold more of it in the root zone of your plants if you've done your mulching. So that's really important. The other thing I've mentioned on loads of occasions before, and it really is worth mentioning again in relation to container, any container plantings you might have, any, shrubs, perennials, anything that is looking a little bit tired or a little bit under pressure from this weather, seaweed is going to be your friend. And because it really does create a resilience and add a sort of a toughness to the leaves and a resilience to the plant. So it increases the root zone, it adds vibrancy to the plant. So when something gets a shock from disease or from a period of wet or a period of cold or a period of warmth or a period of drought, whatever it is, if a plant has experienced a shock and is just looking a little bit worse for wears, seaweed is one of the best things to sort of revive it and give it that freshness. Now, we're only in the middle of August, so as we go into the end of August, September, we still have several good months, in the garden. Our perennial borders still should be looking great up until October, end of October, up to heading into November for first frost. Uh, Once we can get some moisture, but the minute we see some little bit of rain coming, some bit of moisture coming, just get seaweed into the mix. That will really, really help your plants. Other plants, maybe roses could be struggling. They will become susceptible to diseases. Hedges, the same thing. So anything that, may become stressed will become susceptible to disease. And that's where seaweed really is your friend. And it will strengthen the plants, before something else gets in on top of them. So watch for that as we come out of this dry period at some stage. It's mad because earlier in the year, a couple of listeners were laughing because I mentioned it will stop raining at some stage, and it will, and it did. And now I'm going to say the opposite. It will start raining at some stage, but it's just not on the cards for the week ahead anyway. So yeah, they're kind of, I don't know if that has helped massively, but I think a lot of people are struggling to, seed sowing has been really tricky. The temperatures are just really, really high. Keeping stuff moist is really high, really difficult. I've sowed carrots outside, as I mentioned a couple of times, and they've just got singed. Now, at this stage, I've given up. I'm not sowing outside, but I'm going to do, and I haven't sowed them yet, but I'm going to do another sowing, a big sowing in the polytunnel with the aim of getting me over the winter with smaller carrots. So I'm not going to have my outdoor carrots this year, and that's really disappointing for me. Um, other things like my raised bed, I actually have never, ever, ever um, watered the raised bed apart from when I plant in something. I've never had to. I use quite a lot of organic matter in that. It's generally speaking a bed that, crops will grow in regardless. But this year it has been a real struggle, and I don't have rainwater saved at that location. I've been very, very tight on rainwater, as I mentioned, and so I haven't been able to water that bed, and I've just, let it do its thing. Onions are not filling out. They're still there, but they're not thriving. So it's been a tricky, tricky, tricky year. I know that I saw this week that Botanic Garden in Wicklow, one of the best open gardens in Ireland, that they've made the decision. I think from the end of August, just check their socials to not open the garden going forward past that point because they're finding it just so they present the garden in such a brilliant way, and it requires a level of effort and work to present in that certain way, but with the amount of water that is required to keep a garden looking the pristine way that they present, um, it's just putting a lot of demand on them, and they've decided, I think it's from the end of August, to not open past that. Now, maybe things will change if the weather changes and so on, but that just goes to show, a garden that's open all the time, a garden or a gardener that's so experienced and well able to, you know, present and look after his garden in a really great way, is struggling with it. So, it has been a tricky year, and as I mentioned, when it comes to sowing seeds, that has been tricky, very, very hot, um, very dry, very hard to keep, especially when you're in seedling trays or if you're, sowing seeds in a tunnel or whatever. It's very, very hard to keep that moisture level right, just with the intensity of the heat that we've had. So yeah, it's been a tricky year, but definitely seaweed will be your friend as we start to, you know, get to the point where we're getting a little bit of rainfall again. Mulch the same. It can be any type of mulch, but just make sure that you are mulching down, and that will be a big, big help. The other thing I wanted to talk about was on the workshops are back for the autumn. The first one is the on Saturday the 5th of September. And in the springtime I did this one with Laura Darcy. So it's a herbal grow your own herbal garden workshop. And we I suppose loosely base it around 10 popular herbs, or herbs that everybody can grow and maybe should grow. So the herbs that we sort of base it around, but not exclusively, are chamomile, peppermint, lemon balm, calendula, thyme, sage, rosemary, echinacea, oregano, and yarrow. But we also talk about, our what we would call weeds, nettles. We would talk about, basically every type of herb, mullein, all of that sort of stuff. And what we're going to do on this workshop is we're going to focus on building immunity going into the winter time. So that's going to be kind of the theme of it. So we're looking to build immunity in our bodies, and we're going to do that through teas, herbal teas, tinctures, and Laura is, second to none when it comes to knowing what herbs you can use. And there literally is a herb for every ailment, and people come and they ask questions about what about this, or if I have that, is there, something for dry skin on my hands, or is there, whatever the case may be, strengthening my hair. And Laura has all those answers. But what we're going to kind of center the workshop on is building a little bit of immunity in our bodies going into the wintertime. In terms of how it works, it's very much interactive. So myself and Laura sort of dovetail together seamlessly across the day. Um, where I will look after kind of the growing side of it. So we'll look at all these herbs, we'll sow seed, we might take cuttings, we'll have plants of these on the day as well. And, we'll look at how these grow, what we need to grow them, how we can incorporate them into our gardens, how we can add them to, what we already have. We'll also create um, a herb bed on the day. So a specific bed with herbs in it. And we'll show how to plant up that, how to have a herb garden for yourself. Um, so that's kind of the gist of it, but it really is going to be centered around building immunity. So far, there's 14 spots maximum on it. So far, there's two spots gone. So anyone else looking to come, please get booking now. I am putting the link to it in the show notes, and yeah, I'll start doing a little bit of promotion on it over the next week as well. So, it's yeah, it goes from 10 in the morning until I think it's half three in the afternoon. Lunch is provided, and yeah, it's a really nice day out as well. So, if you are interested in boosting your immunity or your family's immunity, or you want to ask questions about herbs, or you're interested in herbs, you're interested in, how they can support us in our gardens, you know, from a well-being perspective, from a culinary perspective, from all of those aspects, then this is a very, very good workshop. So Laura is Yarrow Lane Herbs. She runs a lot of different courses. She has monthly subscription boxes as well. So yeah, really, really good herbalist. And yeah, we work well together. So looking forward to that. So that workshop is Saturday the 5th of September, and the link to that is in the show notes. In the meantime, we're hoping for some nice light rain over many days to freshen everything up. And when things do start to freshen up, remember what I was saying about seaweed, that really is useful. So liquid seaweed, generally speaking, is going to be the fastest way of, giving plants a really nice sheen again. So yeah, bear that in mind. And yeah, hopefully, as I say, we'll be getting a little bit of rain soon. But that's been this week's episode. Thanks for listening, and until the next time, happy gardening.